My own cashier thanked me for paying into an account I never opened. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day in the West End where the heat settles into the asphalt and stays there long after the sun has softened. I had stopped by my son Daryl's diner, Daryl's down home, for a plate of smothered pork chops. The place was his dream, a dream I had mortgaged my house to help him build. "That's a good bit you put on the house account last month, Mrs. Jenkins," the young woman behind the counter said. Her name was Shania, and she had a bright, sweet smile that reminded me of a girl I taught in Sunday school years ago. "Helped us get that new freezer in the back." I paused, my hand on my wallet. The worn leather felt suddenly foreign. "The house account?" I asked, keeping my voice even. The hum of the beverage cooler beside me seemed to grow louder. "Yeah, you know," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen. "For the building. Daryl said you handle all that." I smiled, a small, tight movement of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. "Of course," I said, and slid a $20 bill across the counter for my meal. "Keep the change, dear." She beamed. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. You eat for free here, you know. Daryl always says." "I know what he says," I murmured, picking up my takeout container. The weight of it felt immense. But I like to pay my way. Grief makes you slow. It's a thick fog that muffles the sharp edges of the world. For the 18 months since I'd lost my Earl, my world had been very muffled. I moved through my days by habit, not by intention. I woke up. I tended to the small rose garden Earl had planted. I paid my bills. I went to church, and on Tuesdays, I ate at my son's diner. The routine was a balm, a way to move forward without having to think too hard about the vast emptiness beside me. Earl and I had built a good life in this duplex. We bought it when the neighborhood was just starting to turn, when our parents told us we were foolish to invest in a part of town everyone else was leaving. But Earl saw the foundation. He always saw the bones of things. We lived in one half and rented out the other. It was our security, our legacy for the boys. 30 years I'd spent as a bookkeeper for a downtown textile firm, tracing decimal points and balancing ledgers that told the stories of other people's ambitions. My own ledger, the one for our little household, was a thing of meticulous beauty. Every utility bill, every rent check from next door, every grocery receipt, recorded in my neat, sloping cursive. Earl used to joke that I could find a missing nickel in a hurricane. After he passed, the ledger stayed on the desk in our little office nook, but I didn't open it as much. The numbers felt pointless without him there to appreciate the perfect solid black zero at the bottom of the page. Daryl, my eldest, had stepped in to help. He was the one with the big personality, the big dreams. Curtis, my younger boy, was quieter, a high school science teacher living 2 counties over with his wife and my grandbaby Maya. He was steady, like Earl. Daryl was a storm. "Mama, don't you worry about the duplex finances," Daryl had said, his large hand covering mine. We were at my kitchen table a few months after the funeral. The air was still thick with the scent of sympathy casseroles. "You've got enough on your plate. I'll handle the rent deposits from Mrs. Bell next door. Just one less thing for you to think about." It had sounded like kindness. A son taking care of his grieving mother. Grief makes people very easy to persuade. I had agreed. It felt like a relief. So for over a year, Mrs. Bell's rent check was picked up by Daryl, and I simply saw the corresponding deposit appear in my bank statement. Or so I thought. That evening, after Shania's innocent comment, the silence in my half of the duplex was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of solitude. It was an active, listening silence. The house felt like it was waiting. I made my tea, sat in Earl's worn armchair, and let the steam warm my face. A house account? For the building. What building? This building. My building. The thought was a small, cold stone dropping into the placid water of my grief. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and dried it with methodical care. Then I walked to the office nook, the floorboards creaking a familiar complaint. I turned on the small brass lamp, and the warm yellow light fell across the closed ledger. My ledger. I ran my fingers over the worn green cover. It had been a long time. With a deep breath that felt like breathing in dust, I opened it. The pages were filled with my life, with our life. I turned to the last entry I had made before handing things over to Daryl. Everything balanced, perfectly. Then I looked at the subsequent months. I had been making entries based on my bank statements, ticking off the deposits that matched Mrs. Bell's rent. But I hadn't been looking at the actual checks. I had just been matching the numbers. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out the shoebox where I kept the statements. I laid them out on the desk, month by month. The deposit was always there. $950. Every month. But Shania's words echoed in my head. A good bit you put on the house account last month. A good bit. Not just the rent. And why would my rent money be going to a new freezer for his restaurant? The cold stone in my gut was getting heavier. I stood up and walked to the phone, my legs feeling stiff. I dialed Mrs. Bell's number. She'd lived in the other half of the duplex for 15 years. She answered on the second ring. "Loretta, honey, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice warm and crackly. "I'm fine, Thelma, just fine," I said. "I had a quick question for you, if you don't mind. It's just for my records." "Anything, dear. You know that." "The rent checks," I began, choosing my words with care. "You've been giving them to Daryl each month, right?" "Of course. Right on the first, just like I always did with you and Earl. God rest his soul. Daryl's a good boy. Coming by to pick it up. Saves me a walk." "I know he is," I said softly. "Thelma, this might seem like a strange question. Have you been paying anything extra for repairs or anything like that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the television playing softly in her living room. "Well, no, not extra," she said slowly. "Daryl raised the rent 6 months ago. Said it was for upkeep, property taxes going up, and all that. I didn't mind. It's still a fair price for this neighborhood." The room tilted slightly. My hand tightened on the receiver. "He raised the rent?" "Yes, back in March, to $1,200. He said he discussed it with you, that you were trying to build up a little fund for a new roof in a few years. I thought it was smart planning." She chuckled. "You always were the smart one with money, Loretta." $1,200. My bank statements showed a consistent deposit of $950. The cold stone was now a block of ice. My breath hitched. "Thelma," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "could I trouble you for one more thing?" "Of course. Do you happen to keep copies of your cashed checks, or have the images from your bank?" "Oh, I've got all my receipts. I'm old-fashioned that way," she said proudly. "I keep everything in a binder. Why? Is there a problem?" "No, no problem at all," I lied, the words tasting like ash. "Just reconciling my books. It's been a while. Would it be too much trouble to ask you to make copies of the last 6 for me? I can come get them tomorrow." "It's no trouble at all, Loretta. I'll have them ready for you in the morning." I hung up the phone and stood there in the quiet house, my knuckles white on the receiver. For 6 months, my son had been taking an extra $250 from a trusting old woman. And for 18 months, he had been depositing her $950 check somewhere else entirely, then transferring that exact amount into my account to keep me from noticing. He was skimming from his tenant and lying to his mother. And suddenly, I understood something. This wasn't just about a freezer. This was a system. meticulous, in its own deceitful way. And the bookkeeper in me, the part of me that had been dormant for so long, woke up with a quiet, terrible fury. The next morning, I met Mrs. Bell on our shared front porch. The air was already thick with the coming heat, but a light breeze rustled the leaves of the big oak tree in the yard. She handed me a manila envelope. "Here you are, Loretta," she said, her brow furrowed with a little worry. "Is everything truly all right? Darrell isn't in some kind of trouble, is he?" I forced another smile. "Everything is fine, Thelma. Thank you for this. You have no idea how much it helps." I took the envelope inside and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Darrell had promised to take care of me. I pulled out the copies. The front of each check was made out to Jenkins Property Management, an entity that did not exist. I had never formed a management company. I flipped them over. The endorsement on the back was a rubber stamp. For deposit only, Darrell's Down Home, LLC. He hadn't even bothered to hide it well. He had simply counted on me never looking. He had counted on my grief. The ice in my stomach spread to my chest, a cold, heavy weight that made it hard to breathe. He had used my love for Earl, my trust in him, as a shield for his theft. I folded the copies neatly and placed them in my handbag. I had another stop to make. The bank. The downtown branch of Atlanta Fidelity was cool and quiet, a temple of marble and hushed transactions. I had been a customer there for 40 years. Reggie, the branch manager, had started as a teller when he was just a teenager. I'd watched him grow up, get married, have children of his own. He came from behind his desk when he saw me, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Loretta Jenkins, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" he asked, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. "I'm managing, Reggie. One day at a time," I said. His kindness made the coldness inside me feel sharper, more painful. "I was hoping you could help me with something. It requires a bit of discretion." His smile faded into a look of professional concern. "Of course. Anything. Let's go into my office." We sat in the leather chairs opposite his big mahogany desk. The air smelled of wood polish and paper. I took a deep breath. "Reggie, I need to look at the deposit records for my checking account for the past 18 months, I began. "Specifically, the deposits made from my tenant, Thelma Bell." He nodded, already typing on his keyboard. "That's easy enough. We can pull the transaction history right up. Is there a specific issue?" "I have reason to believe the checks have not been deposited directly into my account," I said, my voice steady. I laid one of the copied checks from Mrs. Bell on his desk. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the front and then the back. He was silent for a long moment. He put the paper down and looked at me, his expression carefully neutral. "The endorsement is for Darrell's Down Home, LLC," he stated quietly. "Yes," I said, "but the deposit slips in my statements just show a transfer into my account for the amount of $950, not a check deposit. I need to know where that transfer is coming from." He turned back to his computer, his fingers flying across the keys. The only sound in the room was the soft clicking and the hum of the air conditioning. I watched his face. I saw the moment he found it. A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Okay, Loretta," he said, his voice low. "Here's what I'm seeing. On the 2nd of every month, for the last 18 months, a check from Thelma Bell has been deposited into the business account for Darrell's Down Home, LLC. I closed my eyes for a second. Hearing it confirmed by him made it real in a way the paper hadn't. "And on the 3rd of every month," he continued, "an electronic transfer of exactly $950 is made from that same business account into your personal checking account." He stopped typing and swiveled his chair to face me fully. "So, on your statement, it looks like a clean deposit, but the original check, and any amount over the 950 is staying in his account. He paused. Loretta, the check you showed me is for $1,200. I know, I said. The words were dry in my throat. He leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. This is a classic wash. He's using his business account to launder the rent money, skimming the difference, and covering his tracks with the transfer. He's counting on you only looking at the bottom line on your statement, not the source of the deposit. He shook his head slowly. It's clean, deceptive, but clean enough that no automatic flags would be raised unless someone knew to look. He looked at the pain he knew must be on my face. What do you want to do, Loretta? This is forgery. It's theft. We can file a report. I thought of Daryl, my firstborn, the boy I had taught to read, the one whose scraped knees I had bandaged. I saw him standing in his diner, proud and beaming, on opening day. Then I saw the rubber stamp on the back of Mrs. Bell's check. Apparently, ambition works both ways. Not yet, I said. First, I need you to do something else for me. I need copies of everything. The deposit slips for his account showing Mrs. Bell's checks. The electronic transfer records into my account. Everything you can find for the last 18 months. Reggie held my gaze. You know, your husband Earl set up a number of safeguards on your accounts after his diagnosis. He was a smart man. He made me a co-signer on a discretionary security account for you. He said, Reggie, if Loretta ever comes to you looking worried, you help her. No questions asked. It seems he knew his boys. The mention of Earl sent a sharp pang through my chest. Of course he had. Earl always saw the bones of things. He had seen the potential for this, even if I hadn't. He was a very smart man, I agreed, my voice thick with unshed tears. Thank you, Reggie. I'll wait. He nodded and turned back to his work, his movements precise and efficient. As I sat there, in the cold, quiet office, I realized the fog of grief was finally lifting, and what I saw in the clarity was ugly, and it was heartbreaking, and it was my own son. But for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I was a bookkeeper, and someone's books were about to be balanced. I left the bank with a thick envelope full of financial records that told a story of profound betrayal. Holding it felt like holding a weapon I never wanted to possess. My next stop was not home. There was another person Earl had insisted I meet years ago, a woman he'd put on a retainer for our estate, a woman named Claudine Hayes. I had her card in my wallet, where it had sat untouched for 3 years. Her law office was in a restored Victorian house in Inman Park, painted a tasteful gray with white trim. It was a world away from the bustling, worn-in comfort of the West End. Inside, everything was cream-colored carpets and quiet competence. Ms. Claudine was a tall, elegant woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat twist. She wore a string of pearls and had a handshake that was both gentle and firm. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses with eyes that were intelligent and kind. Mrs. Jenkins, she said, gesturing to a chair, it's been a while. I was so very sorry to hear about Earl's passing. He was a fine man, a very thorough man. Thank you, Miss Claudine, I said, sitting down. It's his thoroughness that brings me here today. I didn't waste time. I laid out the situation plainly, fact by fact, just as I would have presented a financial report. I told her about the diner, the mortgage I had taken out to help him. I told her about his offer to help with the duplex. I showed her the copies of Mrs. Bell's checks, the endorsements, and the bank records Reggie had printed for me. I spoke in a calm, measured voice, keeping the tremor I felt in my hands from traveling up into my words. She listened without interruption, her gaze fixed on me. She examined each document I placed on her polished desk, her expression unchanging. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "And you're certain your younger son, Curtis, knows nothing of this?" she asked finally. "I'm positive," I said. "Curtis is a good man. He wouldn't stand for this." "I see." She leaned back in her chair, tapping a long, manicured finger on the desk. "Daryl's name is not on the deed to the duplex, correct? It is solely in your name now that Earl has passed." "That's correct," I confirmed. "And you said you mortgaged your home, the side of the duplex you live in, to help him with his first food truck, which became the diner." "Yes, $150,000. He makes the payments on that loan. At least, I assume he does." A flicker of something, disapproval perhaps, crossed her face. "We'll need to verify that as well. But there's something else here, something Earl put in place that I think you need to see." She stood and walked over to a tall filing cabinet. She pulled out a thick file marked Jenkins, Earl, and Loretta. She brought it back to the desk and opened it, her movements efficient. She extracted a document, several pages long, stapled at the corner. "Earl was a planner," she said, her voice softening. "He loved you very much, Mrs. Jenkins, and he knew his sons. He knew Daryl had the ambition, and he knew Curtis had the steady hand. He wanted to provide for both of them, but he also wanted to protect you." She slid the document across the desk to me. "This is the operating agreement for the duplex as a rental property. It's a standard form, but Earl had a specific clause added. He called it the legacy clause. It's essentially a buy-sell agreement, triggered upon the death of either you or him." I picked up the papers. My hands were shaking now. I read the legal language, my eyes skipping over the jargon until I found the section she was talking about. It stated that upon the death of one owner, the full title would pass to the survivor, which was me. However, the business interest of the property, the rental income and its management, was to be treated as a separate entity, and this is the part that made my breath catch in my throat. It stipulated that this business interest would be inherited jointly by our sons, Daryl and Curtis, with the surviving parent acting as executor. But, and it was a very large but, if one son were ever found to be acting in a manner financially detrimental to the property or the family's estate, his share would be forfeited and passed entirely to the other sibling. The determination of financially detrimental was left to the discretion of the surviving parent, with legal oversight. "Daryl doesn't know about this," I whispered. It wasn't a question. "No," Ms. Claudine confirmed. "Earl was specific. This document was not to be discussed with the boys unless a specific contingency was met. He didn't want to cause friction between them. He hoped it would never be necessary. He saw it as a fire extinguisher. You keep it in the wall and pray you never have to break the glass." She looked at me, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Mrs. Jenkins, your son has not only been stealing from you and your tenant, he has been systematically violating the trust of his father's legacy. This clause gives you all the power you need. Daryl's actions are, without question, financially detrimental." I stared at the paper, at my late husband's looping, confident signature at the bottom. He had seen this. He had prepared for it. He had left me a shield, a sword, forged from his love and his foresight. The tears I had been holding back for days finally burned behind my eyes. "There's one more thing," Ms. Claudine said, her voice gentle. "I did a preliminary property search before you arrived. There's a hearing scheduled with the county in 12 days, a petition to refinance the entire duplex property. It was filed by Daryl, using a power of attorney document he had you sign last year." I remembered it vaguely. He'd said it was for handling utilities and small repairs, to save me the trouble. A convenience. I felt a wave of nausea. He's trying to leverage the full value of the property, your home and the rental unit, To secure a much larger business loan, she explained. He's likely deep in debt, and he's using your primary asset as his way out. He is counting on your signature and on your grief-induced lack of attention to push it through. Once that refinancing happens, the bank will have a lien on the entire building. Your home would be at risk if his business fails. Guardianship, the property, the legacy. It all clicked into place. This was not a series of small, desperate thefts. This was a calculated, long-term plan to seize control of his father's life's work. And I, the bookkeeper, had almost let him do it. Because I had stopped looking at the books. I took a shaky breath and looked up at Ms. Claudine. The blur of tears sharpened my vision. "Break the glass," I said. She gave me a small, grim smile. "I'll start drafting the paperwork immediately. We will attend that hearing. But first, you have a decision to make. How do you want to handle this with your son?" I thought about a big, explosive confrontation. The shouting, the accusations, the drama. But that wasn't my way. It wasn't Earl's way. We were quiet people. We believed in order, in facts, in columns that added up correctly. A scene would accomplish nothing. Proof was what mattered. "I'll handle it at Sunday dinner," I said. Before that Sunday, I needed one last piece. Not for the legal case. Ms. Claudine assured me we had more than enough. But for myself. I needed to understand the depth of his mindset. I went to the diner on a Friday evening during the dinner rush. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car in the parking lot across the street, a spot where I could see the front door and the big picture window. The place was busy. Lights glowed warmly inside. I could see Darryl moving through the tables, clapping men on the back, smiling at children, refilling coffee cups. He looked happy. He looked successful. He looked like the son I had always been so proud of. From a distance, the picture was perfect. After about an hour, I saw him step outside with his head cook, a young man with tattoos up his arms. They stood under the awning, catching a breath of the evening air. Darryl was laughing about something, shaking his head. I couldn't hear their words, but I could read their body language. The cook said something, and Darryl's expression shifted. He glanced over his shoulder, back into the bustling restaurant. Then he said something that I couldn't hear, but I could see the shape of the words. He gestured dismissively, a flick of his wrist. He said something else, and I saw the cook nod. It was a casual conversation, a moment between a boss and his employee. But then Darryl leaned in a little, a conspiratorial smile on his face, and though I couldn't hear the exact words, the sentiment carried across the asphalt on the humid night air. I felt it more than I heard it. He was talking about me, about the duplex, the money. It was in the casual way he shrugged, the confidence in his posture. And then I imagined the words I knew he must be thinking, the kind of thing he would say in what he thought was a private moment. "She thinks gravy and pie settle her share." The thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was so perfectly him. The dismissiveness, the arrogance, the belief that a good meal and a show of affection were enough to blind me, to placate me, that my love and support could be bought so cheaply, that I, a woman who had spent her entire professional life navigating the hard, unforgiving logic of numbers, could be so easily fooled. In that moment, sitting alone in my car in the dark, the last vestiges of my maternal denial crumbled into dust. This wasn't my son making a mistake. This was a stranger wearing my son's face. A stranger who saw me not as his mother, but as an obstacle, a resource to be managed. I started the car and drove home. The grief was still there, a dull ache for the husband I had lost. But now it was joined by a new grief, a sharper, colder one for the son who had lost his way. There was nothing left to do but set the record straight. Sunday arrived clear and bright. The scent of my peach cobbler cooling on the counter filled the kitchen, a scent that usually meant family, warmth, and love. Today, it felt like a lie. Curtis arrived first with his wife Sarah and my granddaughter Maya. Maya ran to me, her little arms wrapping around my knees. I hugged her tight, burying my face in her hair. The simple, uncomplicated love of a child was a painful contrast to the day's purpose. "Something smells amazing, Mama," Curtis said, kissing my cheek. He had Earl's quiet eyes. He looked around the kitchen. "Where's Darryl?" "He'll be here," I said. "He's bringing the collard greens." Darryl arrived 20 minutes later, loud and cheerful, carrying a large bowl. He filled the doorway, his presence sucking up all the air in the room. He hugged me, a performative squeeze that felt hollow. "Smells like heaven in here, Mama," he boomed. "Nobody makes a cobbler like you." We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays for 40 years. The food was passed, plates were filled. The conversation was light. Curtis talked about a new science experiment he was doing with his 9th graders. Sarah talked about Maya's first steps. Darryl boasted about a glowing review his diner had received in a local food blog. I ate little, pushing the food around my plate. "You're quiet today, Mama," Darryl said, his mouth full of cornbread. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine, son," I said, "just thinking." We finished the main course, and I stood to clear the plates for dessert. As I served the cobbler, Darryl leaned back in his chair, patting his full stomach with a satisfied smile. "You know, Mama," he said, winking at Curtis, "you really should just let me put you on a salary. You eat for free here at my place all the time anyway." He laughed, a big hearty sound that grated on my nerves. That was it. The opening. I placed a slice of cobbler in front of him. Then I went to the sideboard and picked up a large manila envelope. I returned to the table and sat down, placing the envelope beside my plate. The laughter died in the room. Curtis and Sarah exchanged a confused look. "Darryl," I said, my voice calm and low, "I'd like to see your ledger." He blinked, thrown off balance. "My ledger? What are you talking about, Mama? For the diner?" "Yes," I said. "The one where you record the income from the duplex." His face tightened. The jovial host disappeared, replaced by something hard and wary. "Mama, you don't need to worry about that. It's all taken care of. You're getting confused." "I'm not confused, Darryl," I said, my voice as steady as a stone. I opened the envelope and slid the first set of papers across the table toward him. The copies of Mrs. Bell's checks for $1,200. Thelma was kind enough to give me these. He glanced at them, his face draining of color. He looked up at me, his eyes flashing with anger and panic. "What is this? You went behind my back to my tenant?" "Your tenant?" I asked quietly. "I believe she's my tenant, and you've been overcharging her by $250 a month for 6 months. Curtis put his fork down. "Darryl, what's going on?" Darryl ignored him, his eyes locked on me. "You don't understand business, Mama. It's for upkeep, taxes, it's complicated." "I understand bookkeeping," I replied. I slid the next set of papers across the table. The bank records from Reggie, showing the checks being deposited into his business account. "And I understand that for 18 months, you have been depositing my rental income into your account." He looked at the papers, his jaw working. He was cornered, and he was lashing out. "I transfer the money to you, every month. You haven't missed a dime. This is just paperwork, a way to streamline things." "You transferred $950, I corrected him, "while stealing the rest. That's not streamlining, Darryl. That's called skimming." The room was utterly silent. Sarah had her hand on Curtis's arm. Curtis was staring at his older brother, his expression a mixture of disbelief and horror. I mortgaged my home for you, Daryl, I said, my voice still quiet. But now it carried the weight of every sacrifice I had ever made for him. This house, the one your father and I worked our whole lives for, and you used my trust, my grief, as an opportunity. I'm paying that mortgage, he shot back, his voice rising. I'm taking care of everything. Are you? I asked. I reached back into the envelope and pulled out the last document, the one with Earl's signature on it. I slid it across the table. It came to a stop right in front of his plate of untouched cobbler. Your father was a very thorough man. He called this the legacy clause. Daryl picked it up. As he read, I watched every ounce of fight drain out of him. I saw his shoulders slump. I saw the arrogant confidence crumble, revealing the frightened, indebted man underneath. He read the part about the business interest being shared. Then he read the part about forfeiture. His face went ashen. He dropped the papers on the table as if they had burned him. He looked from the document to me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading look I hadn't seen since he was a little boy who had broken my favorite vase. Mama, he whispered. I didn't say anything. I stood up, went to the office nook, and returned with my own ledger, the green one. I opened it on the table for them all to see. 30 years of perfect columns, of balanced accounts, of a life built on honesty and hard work. This, I said, my finger tracing a line of my own neat cursive, is how you run a business. This is how you honor a legacy. I looked at Curtis. His face was a mask of pain. He understood. He finally understood what his brother had become. There was nothing else to say. The numbers spoke for themselves. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Daryl stared at the papers, at my ledger, a man condemned not by accusations, but by arithmetic. The aftermath was quiet and swift. There was no more argument. Daryl left my house that day without another word, leaving the bowl of collard greens on the table. The next morning, Curtis called, his voice thick with shame and sorrow for his brother's actions. I had no idea, Mama, he said over and over. I'm so sorry. I know you didn't, baby, I told him. This isn't on you. Miss Claudine handled everything. She filed the necessary paperwork, invoking the legacy clause. Daryl's half of the business interest from the duplex was legally forfeited and transferred to Curtis. At the refinancing hearing, Ms. Claudine presented our evidence. The petition was summarily dismissed. Daryl's attempt to leverage my home was stopped cold. He was forced to sell his car and take a second mortgage on his own small house to satisfy the most pressing of his diner's debts. The mortgage on my home, the one he was supposed to be paying, was 3 months in arrears. I had to drain a portion of my savings to make it current. The first Sunday after that dinner, the house felt cavernously empty. The silence was heavy again, but then the phone rang. It was Curtis. Hey, Mama, he said. Sarah's making fried chicken. We were thinking of coming over, maybe eating out on the porch, if that's okay. That's more than okay, baby, I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like a year. I'll make a cobbler. And so, a new routine began. Sunday dinners moved from the formal dining room to the front porch. Curtis and Sarah and Maya would come. We'd sit in the old wicker chairs as the sun went down, listening to the sounds of the neighborhood. Curtis, true to his father's nature, was meticulous. He set up a new, transparent system for the duplex rental. He consulted me on everything. He insisted on repaying me the money Daryl had stolen, a little bit each month. I lost a son that day at the dinner table. I see him sometimes, at the grocery store or driving by his diner. He doesn't meet my eye. The easy smile is gone, replaced by a permanent shadow of resentment. The loss of him is a constant, dull ache in my heart. Some things, even a perfectly balanced ledger cannot fix. But I found something too. I found my own strength, a resilience I thought had died with Earl. I found a new depth to my relationship with my other son, a partnership built on the solid foundation of his father's trust. Some evenings I sit on the porch alone, a cup of tea in my hand, and I look at the house Earl and I built. It's safe. It's mine. The fog has lifted for good. The world is sharp and clear again, full of scents and sounds I had forgotten to notice. The sweet perfume of my roses, the distant laughter of children playing down the street, the low hum of Marvin Gaye playing from my kitchen window. The books are balanced, and there is a quiet, cobbler-scented peace in that, a peace I earned.